She wasn't born poor. But life had a way of peeling away comfort until all that was left was hunger. Hunger for more, hunger for better, hunger for anything that didn't feel small. Hi family, I need you to help subscribe to this channel to help us grow, and to help us give you more interesting stories. Thank you. Now let's continue. Mara had been sitting behind the glossy reception desk of Brooks and Lane Enterprises for almost 2 years. Every morning, she watched the same people sweep through the glass doors. Women with bags worth her monthly salary, men with voices that carried power. She memorized their perfumes, their shoes, the way they smiled like life had never told them no. Every time one of them passed, she whispered quietly to herself, "One day, that will be me." But one day had never come at 27. Mara still shared a small 2-bedroom apartment with a cousin who spent her nights gossiping about celebrities. The bills piled up, her salary vanished, and her reflection in the mirror reminded her of something she hated: mediocrity. Her obsession with wealth didn't start out ugly. It began like curiosity. She followed luxury influencers online, saved pictures of wedding rings, beach houses, and silk dresses she couldn't afford. But over time, admiration turned into something darker, a need. She didn't just want to live well. She wanted to live above everyone who had ever looked down on her. Every Friday, Mara lingered in the lobby long after work ended, pretending to tidy the counter just to watch the senior executives leave in black SUVs. They barely noticed her, but that didn't matter. She was learning how they talked, how they dressed, how they moved like money obeyed them. And then, one afternoon, her chance appeared. The entire office went silent as the elevator doors opened. A man stepped out, tall, quiet, not one for show. There was something unsettling about how everyone adjusted themselves the moment they saw him. Even the director stood straighter. Mara didn't know his name then, but she could feel the authority radiating from him. He didn't look at anyone for long, but when his eyes met hers for a brief second, something inside her clicked. That was the look she wanted to earn. That was the man she wanted to know. Later, she overheard whispers in the hallway. His name was Julian Brooks, the elusive CEO who had been abroad for years. Billionaire, reputed to be brilliant, composed, and unreachable. The kind of man no one dared to approach unless spoken to first. And just like that, her hunger found a direction. That night, lying on her narrow bed, Mara replayed the moment over and over. The way he walked past her without effort, without interest, that was power. That was control. She wanted it, but more than that, she wanted him. Not out of love, not even attraction, but opportunity. She told herself it wasn't manipulation. It was survival. The world didn't reward hard work. It rewarded proximity to power. And she was done waiting for fate to hand her a break. In the days that followed, she studied him from afar. His schedule, his assistants, the kind of meetings he attended. She noticed he never entertained chatter, never smiled unless necessary. That only made him more magnetic. Mara started dressing differently. Cleaner lines, muted colors, subtle perfume. Not loud, not desperate. She learned to speak slower, to listen more, to mimic the quiet confidence of the women he respected. It wasn't an overnight change, but she was crafting something. An illusion that could walk among the wealthy and belong. She stopped joining her coworkers for lunch and started eating in the building's cafe, near the executive section. She pretended it was coincidence. She knew what she was doing. The receptionist everyone ignored was turning herself into a woman no one could overlook. Still, at night, when the lights went out and her makeup was gone, the truth stayed with her. She was a broke woman playing a dangerous game. But Mara didn't care. Desperation had erased fear. In her mind, she wasn't chasing a man. She was chasing a life. And if that meant pretending, plotting, or even lying, then so be it. Because deep down, she believed something foolish yet intoxicating. If she could get close enough to power, she could rewrite her story. And somewhere between that belief and her reflection in the mirror, a dangerous promise was born. She would do whatever it took to make the billionaire notice her. For the next few weeks, Mara became invisible by design. She no longer laughed loudly with coworkers or lingered by the lobby desk waiting for attention. Instead, she observed, quietly, intentionally, like a hunter who knows the prey must come to her, not the other way around. Julian Brooks rarely came to the office in person. When he did, it was always brief meetings, calls, departures. He moved through the building like someone walking through air he didn't need to breathe. Everyone tried to impress him, yet he never seemed impressed. That calm detachment drew Mara in deeper. The more unreachable he appeared, the more determined she became. But how does a woman like her make a man like that look twice? Not with beauty. There were women far more beautiful. Not with charm. He didn't have time for smiles, so she decided to use something else. Strategy. She began by volunteering for small office tasks no one wanted. Collecting documents, sorting deliveries, cross-checking meeting files. Put her in the background of everything that passed through Julian's office. Quiet access. Subtle visibility. The first time she saw him up close again, it was accidental, or so it seemed. She was delivering a confidential folder to his assistant when the door opened unexpectedly. He was standing by the window, reviewing something on his tablet. For a moment, he looked at her, really looked, not with curiosity, but with that quiet focus of a man who notices details. "Receptionist, right?" he said without emotion. "Yes, sir," she answered, keeping her tone soft, respectful. He nodded once. "You're efficient. I've seen your name on some internal reports." That single line echoed in her chest like a melody. He'd noticed her. She walked out with steady steps, but her pulse was racing. That brief acknowledgement fed her ambition like oxygen. From that day, Mara refined everything. Her wardrobe became minimalist but elegant. Clean white blouses, fitted trousers, neat hair. She moved differently, spoke less, and smiled strategically. Soon, people in the office began whispering, "She's changing. She's trying too hard." Mara didn't care. The only opinion that mattered belonged to the man upstairs. She studied his habits further. He disliked small talk. He drank black coffee with no sugar. He left the office by 7, always alone. She memorized everything. It wasn't infatuation. It was calculation. Then came the day she'd been waiting for, the day opportunity finally opened its door. The company's annual internal conference was happening at their suburban branch. Julian attended, and Mara volunteered to help with logistics. It wasn't glamorous work. Setting up name tags, arranging seats, checking water bottles, but it placed her exactly where she needed to be. When the conference ended, most employees left early. Only a few executives remained to wrap up. Julian stepped out of the meeting room, looking for his driver. The driver, stuck in traffic, called to say he'd be delayed. Mara overheard it. She didn't think twice. "Sir," she said quietly, walking up to him. "If it's all right, I can arrange a ride back to the city. The company shuttle is still around." He looked at her, unreadable. For a few seconds, silence filled the space. Then he said, "That won't be necessary." She smiled faintly. "At least allow me to wait until your driver arrives. It's getting late, and this place empties out fast." He said nothing, just gave a small nod. That was enough. They waited near the entrance. She didn't speak unless he asked a question. And when he did, her answers were thoughtful, never forced. She told him she liked working there, that she admired his leadership, that she was learning a lot. She didn't tell him she had studied him for weeks, or that every word was a seed carefully planted. When his driver finally arrived, he said, "Thank you for waiting." Her heart fluttered at the sound of it. Simple courtesy, but to her it was progress. That night, Mara couldn't sleep. She replayed the entire scene in her head, from his brief glance to his calm tone. For the first time, she felt close, like the invisible glass between them had a crack. Over the next days, Julian's assistant began calling her to assist with random tasks. A document to deliver, a package to review, small things that kept her near him. Each time she entered his office, she made sure to appear focused, graceful, composed. The receptionist was slowly becoming indispensable. And one afternoon, as she handed him a document, he said something that made her pulse stop. "You're ambitious, aren't you?" She froze slightly. "Ambitious?" He glanced at her, expression calm. "I can tell." You're not like the others. You don't waste words. Mara smiled politely. I just like to do things well, sir. He nodded. That's good. That was all. No flirtation. No warmth. Just acknowledgement. But to Mara it meant she was in. From that moment, she knew he saw her. And if he saw her, she could become anything she wanted to be. Her next move would need to be careful, precise. Because one wrong step and everything she'd built could shatter. But Mara wasn't scared. She was only getting started. Mara had spent her life watching powerful people, but this was the first time she'd felt close enough to touch that world. Close enough to almost belong. And she wasn't planning to let it slip away. After that brief exchange in Julian's office, something shifted. The staff treated her differently now, half in envy, half in confusion. The CEO knew her name. It was enough to make whispers swirl around her desk. Some said she must be sleeping with him. Others said she was related to someone important. Mara said nothing. Let them talk. Every rumor made her seem a little more powerful. She knew the mistake most people made when chasing power. They became desperate too soon. They asked for favors. They begged for attention. Mara would do neither. She would let Julian come to her. So she began her performance. Subtle, quiet, patient. When he walked through the lobby, she greeted him with a polite smile and returned to work as though he were any other man. When his assistant needed help, she was already there, organized, prepared. When he passed by her desk unexpectedly one morning, she didn't stand up or fumble. She simply looked up and said, "Good morning, sir," with steady eyes. That composure intrigued him. He wasn't a man easily fooled by flattery. He had seen too many women melt around money, too many fake smiles. But there was something about Mara's restraint that made him pause. A stillness, a calculation that mirrored his own. She knew he was studying her too. And she wanted that. One Thursday evening, as employees packed up, his assistant approached Mara's desk. "Mr. Brooks needs help reviewing some files before tomorrow's board meeting. He asked if you could stay a little longer." Her heart skipped. Of course. By the time she entered his office, the floor was nearly empty. He sat behind his desk. Sleeves rolled up, the city light reflecting faintly on the glass wall behind him. He didn't look up immediately. "You're punctual." "Always," she replied softly. He motioned for her to sit, then handed her a file. "Go through these. I want them reordered by client type, not by region." She worked silently. He didn't speak again. The room was filled only with the quiet rhythm of paper and pens. But Mara was fully aware of the unspoken tension between them. Two people who understood the game, both pretending not to. When she finished, she placed the stack neatly on his desk. "All done." He scanned her work briefly, then looked at her. "You're efficient. Most people rush through things when they think no one's watching." Mara smiled faintly. Someone is always watching. That made him smile. The smallest, rarest expression she'd ever seen on his face. It was a victory she didn't show, but she felt it. A seed planted. Over the next few weeks, the late-night work sessions became routine. Not frequent enough to raise suspicion, but enough to build familiarity. He spoke to her more, not about his personal life, but about business, decisions, timing. It made her feel trusted, even if she wasn't. Mara began to adjust her tone, her words, her posture. Everything crafted to make her seem irreplaceable. She wasn't flirting. She was positioning. And then came the moment she had been waiting for, his guard slipping just slightly. He asked casually, "You never talk about yourself, Mara. Don't you have family?" She tilted her head, her voice soft and careful. "Not much worth talking about." He studied her for a second longer than usual, then looked away. "I can respect that." That night, she left the office knowing she had him exactly where she wanted, curious. And curiosity was the first crack in control. The following month, when the company hosted a private investor dinner, she found herself invited by name. It wasn't glamorous or public, just a small professional gathering. But the invitation was everything she'd been working for. When she walked in, she wasn't the receptionist anymore. She was the woman at the billionaire's side, quietly confident, wearing an elegant black dress she could barely afford. She didn't cling to him or demand attention. She simply existed beside him like she belonged. A presence, not a decoration. By the end of the night, people noticed. "Who's that with Julian Brooks? Oh, the receptionist?" Really? The whispers didn't matter. She had stepped into his world, and no one could unsee it. After the dinner, as his car waited outside, Julian said simply, "You handled yourself well tonight." "Thank you, sir." He paused as if deciding something. "Call me Julian, at least outside the office." Mara's lips curved slightly. "All right, Julian." That single word, his name on her tongue, felt like a door unlocking. She didn't sleep that night. She didn't even try. Because in that moment, she knew the trap she had been setting for weeks had finally started to close. And the best part was he didn't even know it yet. By the time summer came, Mara was no longer just the receptionist everyone ignored. She had become a fixture in Julian's routine, calm, efficient, dependable, and that was exactly what she wanted. Their connection grew in moments no one noticed, at a brief conversation in the hallway, a late-night call for a work correction, a shared silence that said more than words. To outsiders, it looked professional. But to Mara, it was the foundation of something bigger, the life she'd always dreamed of, finally within reach. Julian didn't shower her with compliments or gifts. That wasn't his style. But his actions began to shift. He trusted her with confidential projects, invited her into meetings, and sometimes, when tension filled the room, she was the only person he listened to. And that trust was all she needed to turn strategy into intimacy. One Friday, after a long meeting, Julian offered her a ride home. It was the first time they'd ever shared space beyond the office walls. His car smelled of leather and quiet success. He didn't speak much, and she didn't push conversation. She just watched the city lights slide by, each reflection reminding her how far she'd come. When he stopped in front of her building, she hesitated before getting out. "Thank you, Julian." He nodded. "You work hard. Don't let people take that for granted." Sounded simple, but to her it was a door, one she planned to walk through. From that night, their relationship shifted. He began inviting her to private dinners under the excuse of discussing company matters. At first, it was quiet, controlled, business-minded. Then gradually, the tone softened. Laughter between bites, long pauses, steady glances that lingered longer than they should. Mara was careful not to rush it. She knew how fragile rich men's trust could be. She mirrored his pace, his silence, his calm, letting him believe he was leading when, in truth, she was guiding him exactly where she wanted him to go. And then it happened. On a quiet evening, after one of those dinners, Julian said the words that sealed her fate. "You don't have to keep calling me sir at work anymore. It feels unnecessary now." Mara smiled, lowering her gaze slightly. "Then what should I call you?" He looked at her for a long second before answering. "Call me yours." The words weren't romantic, not even dramatic. They were direct, deliberate, and that made them powerful. Within weeks, rumors spread through the company like wildfire. The CEO and the receptionist were together. People called her lucky. Some called her reckless. Mara didn't care. She'd spent too many years invisible. She was finally being seen. Julian was private, but he didn't hide her. He introduced her as someone important in his life. That was all she needed: validation, access, visibility. Their relationship moved fast. Too fast. But Mara didn't question it. When he suggested they make it official, she agreed before he could even finish the sentence. It wasn't love. It was strategy wearing a smile. The wedding preparations were quiet and swift. There was no grand proposal, no public announcement. Julian said he valued privacy, and Mara pretended to agree. In truth, she wanted the headlines, the lights, the luxury. But she told herself all that would come later, once she was his wife. On a Tuesday morning, a car from his legal team arrived at her apartment. A polite assistant handed her a folder of documents, saying, "Standard marriage forms. Mr. Brooks just wants everything organized before the ceremony." Mara barely flipped through them. The pages were filled with legal words she didn't understand, and didn't care to. She signed every sheet with a confident smile. She had no idea one of those pages would destroy her entire plan. The ceremony itself was small, intimate, quiet. Only a few witnesses, no media, no glamour. She wore a simple white dress, far from the designer gown she had imagined, but she smiled anyway. Because to her, that moment wasn't about the dress. It was about the title. Mrs. Mara Brooks. The name rolled beautifully in her mind. It was the sound of victory. After the ceremony, Julian's words were gentle, almost rehearsed. You'll move into the main house this weekend. Everything you need will be arranged. She thanked him softly, already picturing herself draped in luxury, already counting what would soon belong to her. But what she didn't see, what no one saw, was the quiet satisfaction behind his calm expression. He wasn't the naive man she believed him to be. He knew why she'd come into his life. He knew every move she made was planned. And he'd planned something of his own. The papers she had signed weren't just standard marriage forms. Among them, buried under harmless legal language, was a document that would make sure she left their marriage exactly how she came into it, with nothing. Mara had set her trap carefully. She just didn't realize she had stepped into a better one. The first morning in Julian's mansion didn't feel like a fairy tale. It felt organized, perfectly arranged. Every object had its place, and so did she. The staff greeted her politely, but with a stiffness that made her chest tighten. They weren't impressed. They weren't curious. They were simply prepared. Julian's world ran like a system, quiet, polished, predictable. And in that order, Mara started to feel the weight of her own noise. She tried to fill the silence with laughter, conversation, perfume, anything that made her feel alive. But Julian remained the same, calm, unreadable, distant in a way that almost felt intentional. He still spoke kindly, still treated her with respect. But his tone carried no affection. Every gesture felt supervised. When she leaned in for affection, he smiled politely and changed the topic. When she tried to spark passion, he gave her courtesy instead. It was like loving a wall of glass. She could see him, but could never reach him. Weeks turned into months, and the house began to feel colder. Mara decorated her room, hosted little dinners, posted subtle pictures online. All with one goal, to build the illusion of a perfect life. But inside, she was unraveling. The luxury didn't feel like hers. The mansion wasn't a home. It was a museum of everything she couldn't touch. And then one evening, curiosity became her undoing. Julian was away on a business trip. She walked into his study, the one room she'd never been invited into. Everything there looked deliberate. The heavy desk, the family photographs, the safe tucked behind an abstract painting. It wasn't the safe that caught her eye. It was the folder sitting on top of it, labeled Prenuptial Addendum, Confidential. The words hit like thunder. She opened it. And there it was, her own signature at the bottom of a document that spelled her doom. It stated, in precise legal terms, that upon separation or divorce, Mara Brooks forfeits all marital claims and rights to financial compensation or property. Every page screamed betrayal. The very thing she thought she had mastered, manipulation, had been turned against her. She dropped the papers, her hands trembling. How? When? And then it hit her, the morning the assistant had come. The pages she hadn't read. The trust she had faked. Only to be outplayed by someone who never trusted her at all. She sank into Julian's chair, staring at the document until the words blurred. For the first time, she wasn't angry. She was afraid. When Julian returned that night, she waited for him in the living room. He walked in. Calm as always, suit crisp, watch gleaming. She stood, holding the folder. You knew, she said softly. He met her eyes without surprise. I did. Why marry me then? Because I wanted to see how far you'd go, he replied. And because I don't punish people with anger, Mara. I let the truth do it for me. Her breath hitched. So this was all a game? No, he said. It was a lesson. The words sliced deeper than any insult could. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't cruel. He was just done. Mara wanted to argue, to scream, to remind him of everything she'd given up. But deep down, she knew she had built her empire on deceit. And deceit doesn't mourn when it collapses. It only remembers where it cracked. Over the next few days, she noticed changes. The driver no longer waited for her outside. Her spending card stopped working. Her name disappeared quietly from the company website. Julian didn't throw her out, that he just erased her. Politely, efficiently, completely. By the end of the month, she was back in the same apartment she had left, only now with silence instead of ambition. She scrolled through old photos, her fake smiles, her captioned victories, her filtered dreams, and for the first time, she didn't recognize the woman in them. She realized then that what she had chased all along wasn't Julian. It was validation, the desperate need to be seen, and the cruelest part? He had seen her all along, just not the way she wanted. Mara leaned back, whispering to herself, "I wanted to win," but the walls stayed quiet, as if to say, "You played the wrong game." Mara finally had everything she once dreamed about. The mansion, the designer wardrobe, the quiet servants who called her ma'am to outsiders. She looked like the woman who won. But inside the walls of that perfect home, she was living a life she couldn't touch. Every morning began the same. The automatic blinds slid open, flooding her room with light that felt too harsh. Breakfast waited on the long dining table, but she ate alone. Julian's seat stayed empty most days. His business meetings, his travel, his silence stretching longer than any distance. She tried to fill the emptiness with routine. Personal trainers, stylists, brunch with women who smiled through envy. She spoke their language now, brands, vacations, social posts, but it was all performance. They didn't see the panic behind her glossed lips. They didn't know she checked her account balance every night, afraid to see another freeze. The prenup she discovered in his study haunted her at first. She tried to pretend it wasn't real, convincing herself Julian would never enforce it. But the way he looked at her since that night, calm, detached, final, told her everything. He hadn't married her for companionship, that he had married her to teach her what money couldn't buy. One afternoon, she threw herself into redecorating the mansion. New art, new curtains, a new identity. She believed maybe if the house looked alive, she would feel alive too. But when Julian walked in that night, his expression didn't change. "You're redecorating again?" he asked. "I just thought the place needed warmth." "It doesn't," he said simply, walking past her. No argument, no discussion, just the cold finality of someone who had already emotionally left. That night, Mara lay awake, replaying every step that brought her here. The party she crashed, the charm she practiced, the lies she told to make Julian see her. She remembered the night she vowed to never be poor again, and now, surrounded by everything she once begged the universe for, she had never felt poorer. Still, pride refused to let her leave. She started attending charity events and business launches on Julian's behalf, smiling for cameras beside a man who barely stood close enough to touch her. People called her Mrs. Cross, a name that sounded elegant and empty all at once. Whenever she heard women whisper about her good fortune, she wanted to scream. If they only knew that good fortune came with a contract that stripped her soul. One evening, she caught sight of herself in a mirror before another event. Silk gown, flawless makeup, diamond earrings glinting under soft light. For a second, she didn't recognize the woman staring back. This was the life she wanted, wasn't it? The proof that she made it. Then why did it feel like punishment? Julian entered, buttoning his cufflinks. "Ready?" he asked without looking at her. "Julian," she said quietly, "do you ever wonder if this is worth it?" He finally looked at her, his gaze sharp but unreadable. "Depends on what it is," he replied. "This marriage," she whispered. He paused. "You wanted this life, Mara. You chased it. You built it on the wrong foundation, but it's yours now. Congratulations." And then he walked away. Those words stayed with her all evening, echoing louder than the music and polite laughter. She smiled through everything, her chest tightening with every compliment about her dress, her husband, her beauty. She realized then that she had achieved everything people worship, but none of it was hers. After the guests left, she stood by the window, the city lights stretching endlessly ahead. For the first time, she didn't envy anyone. She pitted herself. All she had ever wanted was to belong somewhere beautiful, But now she understood that beauty without peace is a slow kind of death. Julian had given her exactly what she thought she wanted, and taken from her the only thing she never valued enough: sincerity. That night, Mara removed her wedding ring and placed it on the marble counter. It sparkled under the dim light. Mocking her, she whispered, "This was supposed to save me." But the house stayed silent, and the silence, finally, told her the truth. The life she wanted had destroyed her. Mara didn't sleep much after that night. Every creak in the hallway, every knock at the door made her jump. It wasn't fear of Julian, it was fear of truth. She had lived too long pretending not to know. But truth has a way of finding people who try to hide from it. The next morning, she decided to visit Julian's office. She didn't call. She didn't ask permission. She simply arrived, dressed in black silk and determination. His employees straightened the moment she walked in. She had that aura of power, the kind that looked expensive but cost too much to keep. Julian was behind his desk, eyes fixed on a file. He didn't look surprised to see her. "Mara," he said, "to what do I owe this visit?" "I want to talk about the prenup," she said, steady but breathless. He closed the file, leaned back in his chair. "Which part?" "The part you didn't tell me about. The hidden clause." He tilted his head slightly. "You mean the one you signed without reading?" The words hit her like a slap. "You tricked me." "No," he said calmly. "I tested you. You passed. Just not the way you hoped." She clenched her fists. "You humiliated me, Julian." "I protected myself," he corrected. "You came into this marriage with lies. You sold me a story you never believed in. That contract was my insurance." His voice was calm, but his eyes carried exhaustion, the kind that came from too much disappointment. Mara swallowed hard. "You think this is about money, isn't it?" he asked quietly. "Wasn't that the point of all your effort?" For a moment she had no answer. The truth stood naked between them. "I thought if I had money," she said slowly, "I'd finally feel safe." Julian nodded once. "And do you?" Silence. Her lips trembled. "No." He leaned forward. "That's the difference between us, Mara. You chase what looks safe. I build what is." Something inside her cracked. She didn't know if it was anger, pride, or shame, but it burned. She stood up. "So what now? You keep me in that mansion like some trophy until I fade out of the headlines." Julian rose too. "No. I'm done pretending. The clause gives you the choice. Stay, live comfortably, and keep your image. Or leave and start over with nothing. Either way, this ends clean." The calmness in his tone scared her more than rage ever could. She realized he wasn't trying to hurt her anymore. He simply no longer cared. When she returned home, the walls of the mansion felt different. Not cold this time. Empty. Like something had already left. She walked from room to room, her heels echoing against marble, her reflection haunting her in every polished surface. Her own face looked foreign, older, lonelier. Later that night, she poured herself a glass of wine and sat by the window. Her phone buzzed with messages. Social media tags, compliments, envy. She stared at them, realizing the world still saw her as the billionaire's wife. But the billionaire had just erased her. The next morning, she met Julian in the dining room. He was finishing his coffee, scrolling through his tablet. "I'll stay," she said softly. He looked up, mildly surprised. "Stay?" "Yes. You want silence, fine. You'll get it. But I'm not walking away from this life I built." Julian studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Then stay. Just know it's not a marriage anymore. It's a mirror." She frowned. "A mirror?" He stood, gathering his papers. "Yes, everything you see here now is a reflection of what you wanted. You earned it. Live with it." And then he left her sitting there, dressed in wealth, drenched in emptiness. That day, Mara began living like a ghost in her own dream. She smiled at staff she didn't know, hosted guests who admired her beauty but never her story. Every laugh she faked felt heavier than the last. The hidden clause wasn't just legal. It was emotional, Julian had crafted a prison so beautiful that no one could see the bars but her. At night, she walked through the house barefoot, touching the cold furniture, whispering to herself, "This is the life I wanted, right?" But there was no answer, only the hum of a refrigerator and the echo of her own voice fading into the air. For the first time, she understood that sometimes punishment doesn't come as loss. It comes as everything you ever wanted, after you've realized you don't deserve it. The days after Julian's final words moved slowly, like time itself was tired of her. Mara tried to convince herself that staying meant power, that she was still in control. But deep down, she knew she had become what he said she was, a reflection, a beautiful image with no meaning behind it. She started waking up earlier, forcing herself into perfection. The hair, the jewelry, the perfume, the smile. Every morning, she dressed up not for love, not for him, but for proof. Proof that she still existed in a life that no longer needed her. At breakfast, Julian sat across from her, reading the news, sipping his coffee. He never looked up when she entered the room anymore. He didn't need to. Her presence had stopped mattering. She began to talk, just to fill the air. "How was the meeting? How's the new project going? Did you see the article they wrote about us?" He'd nod sometimes. Other times, he didn't even answer. The silence between them was no longer tense. It was routine. And that made it worse. Mara tried to rekindle something. Anything. She threw parties, invited designers, influencers, anyone who could remind her of the life she used to crave. The cameras flashed, the champagne poured, the laughter echoed, but none of it reached her. When Julian appeared at one of her parties, he didn't stay long. He just whispered as he passed, "You're dancing for ghosts, Mara," and left. That night, after the guests were gone, she walked through the house barefoot, the hem of her silk gown dragging behind her like a memory that refused to die. She opened Julian's study door, just to feel something forbidden again. But it was empty, stripped clean, the shelves, the documents, even the photograph on his desk were gone. He had quietly moved his work elsewhere. It felt symbolic. He had removed the last trace of himself from her reach. Mara sank into the empty chair, staring at the bare desk. Tears burned her eyes, but she didn't cry. She couldn't. She had spent too long pretending to be powerful to now admit how small she'd become. She thought of all the things she'd done to get here, the fake stories, the calculated charm, the endless effort to look like the kind of woman a billionaire could love. But she had never learned how to be one. The more she tried to hold on, the faster everything slipped. Friends stopped visiting when the invitations stopped coming with gifts. The staff no longer looked at her with respect. Only duty, and Julian had turned into a shadow she couldn't catch. One afternoon, she drove to one of his company buildings, desperate to see him. The receptionist smiled politely but said, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Cross. Mr. Cross isn't available." She frowned. "Did he say when he'll be?" "He's in meetings all day," the woman replied, then hesitated. "But he's been working from the downtown office for months now." Mara's stomach sank. Months, he hadn't told her. He hadn't even thought she deserved to know. That night, she sat at her vanity, staring into the mirror. Her reflection looked flawless, but hollow. She whispered to herself, "You wanted this life so badly, Mara. Look at it now." Her fingers brushed her expensive necklace. The one Julian bought during their honeymoon at IT used to make her feel powerful. Now it just felt heavy. She picked up her phone and scrolled through old photos, her fake smiles, their wedding, the luxury trips. Every image looked staged. Every memory felt borrowed. And then, for the first time, she whispered the truth out loud. "I was never his equal. I was just his lesson." The realization crushed her. But desperation is louder than truth. And Mara wasn't ready to disappear quietly. The next morning, she made calls. To journalists, stylists, old friends. Anyone who could help her step back into the spotlight. If Julian wouldn't give her relevance, she'd take it from the world again. She began showing up at events alone, smiling for the cameras, speaking as if her marriage was still strong. When people asked about Julian, she'd laugh lightly and say, "He's busy as always. That man never rests." She was lying again, But lying was the only thing that still made her feel alive. Every headline that featured her face gave her a rush. Every comment calling her the billionaire's wife gave her comfort. But when the lights went off and the makeup came off, she was just Mara again. Lonely, desperate, dressed in silk and pretending not to unravel. Julian didn't stop her. He didn't warn her. He just watched quietly as she paraded herself, knowing she was building her own downfall. Because the world she was clinging to wasn't hers anymore. It was borrowed. And borrowed things always have to be returned. And deep down, Mara knew. Sooner or later, the world would learn what she had signed away. It began quietly. The kind of quiet that doesn't warn you. It waits, watches, and then strikes when you've already relaxed. For weeks, Mara had been everywhere again. Magazine covers, event panels, online interviews. She spoke about elegance, discipline, success. She mentioned Julian often, carefully, always in past tense wrapped in present grammar. We're building something beautiful together. My husband inspires me daily. The world still believed her. But truth has a cruel sense of timing. It happened one morning in late spring. Her phone buzzed with messages. Too many, too fast. She opened one, then another. Each carried the same headline, copied across dozens of gossip pages. Leaked contract reveals billionaire CEO's wife signed away all rights. The article detailed everything: dates, signatures, clauses. Even the part she hadn't wanted to believe existed. No claim to assets, estates, or inheritance in the event of separation. Her own words were quoted from interviews, now dripping with irony. Love is the greatest wealth. The internet laughed. By noon, the story was everywhere. By evening, it wasn't gossip anymore. It was entertainment. When Julian returned home that night, she was waiting in the living room, still wearing the gown she'd been photographed in just days before. Her makeup streaked down her face, her phone still vibrating with notifications. You leaked it, she said. Julian loosened his tie. No, I just stopped protecting it. Her voice trembled. Do you have any idea what this has done to me? He looked at her, calm as ever. You did it to yourself, Mara. You wanted to be seen. Now the world is watching. She stood, shaking. You've destroyed me. No, he said quietly. You built your entire image on lies and used me as the foundation. You destroyed yourself the day you treated marriage like a ladder. Mara's knees went weak. You think I deserved this humiliation? Julian stepped closer, his tone colder. I think you deserved the truth. And now everyone else finally has it too. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in silence. For the first time, the mansion felt too big to breathe in. She tried to call her publicist, no answer. Her friends? Voicemail. Even the gossip pages that once celebrated her ignored her messages. By morning, the staff avoided eye contact. The driver was gone. Her phone stopped ringing. She had become invisible in a house that had once been her stage. Desperation drove her to one last act. She dressed herself in white silk, ironic, almost cruel, and drove to Julian's downtown office. She didn't wait for permission. She barged in. He was in a meeting, surrounded by executives. The room fell silent when she appeared. Julian, please, she said, her voice trembling but loud. Tell them it's not true. He didn't move. Mara, he said evenly, this isn't the place. Her eyes filled. You said I could stay. You can, he replied. But you can't pretend anymore. The security team stepped forward, gently guiding her out. No shouting. No struggle. Just pity, soft, quiet pity that cut deeper than cruelty. Outside, photographers waited. They captured her mascara-streaked cheeks, her shaking hands clutching her purse. The same cameras that once praised her now devoured her. By nightfall, every platform had a new headline. The billionaire's wife who signed her own exit. Back at the mansion, she poured herself a drink, staring out at the city lights. The life she had built on illusion was collapsing beautifully. Like fireworks fading into smoke, she whispered. They finally got their show. But no applause followed. Only silence. Days passed and Julian didn't return. Her cards were canceled. her name removed from his records. Even the servants were reassigned elsewhere. She had fought so hard to stay, and now the house itself rejected her. One evening, as she packed her last box, she found a note on the kitchen counter. Julian's handwriting. You once said wealth makes you powerful. I hope someday you learn that honesty would have made you stronger. No anger, no emotion, just a quiet farewell from a man who'd long moved on. She folded the note carefully and slipped it into her purse. There was nothing left to take. Not even dignity. When she closed the front door behind her, it didn't echo. It sounded final. That was the night Mara Brooks, the woman who had chased her dream into ruin, finally disappeared from the world she built for herself. Months passed. The world forgot her name. The tabloids moved on to newer scandals, fresher faces, younger wives. And Mara, once the woman in silk, became a whisper. She moved into a small apartment on the edge of the city, a place where nobody knew her, and nobody cared. The marble floors were gone, the chandeliers replaced by a single flickering bulb. Her wardrobe hung like ghosts in the corner, silk and satin useless in a room with peeling paint. She tried to find work, but her name had become a punchline. Every search result was a reminder. The woman who married for money and lost it all. Doors closed politely, but firmly. People smiled at her, but their eyes said you did this to yourself. At first, she told herself it was temporary, that Julian would forgive her, that maybe one day he'd call. But the weeks turned into months, and the silence stretched too long to hold on to. Her reflection began to change. Her hair, once perfectly styled, grew uneven. Her eyes carried shadows sleep couldn't erase. She had the same face, but none of the confidence. She often walked past the company building just to catch a glimpse of him. She never went inside, just stood across the street, hidden behind sunglasses, watching the man she once thought she controlled. He always looked the same. Disciplined, focused, untouchable. He had rebuilt his life without her, stronger and quieter. And for the first time, she understood that he never truly lost anything. She was the only one who did. One evening, Mara sat by her window, looking out at the city lights. The same city that once worshipped her now glowed like a stranger. She whispered softly to herself, I thought I was clever. Her voice cracked. I thought I could make him need me. But greed doesn't build love, it only buys its costume. She remembered how it all began. Her hunger, her dreams, her endless rehearsed charm. How she convinced herself that wealth would fix the parts of her she didn't want to face. And how she'd mistaken attention for affection, power for peace. Now all that remained was truth, and truth doesn't flatter. One morning, a letter came. No name, no return address. Just her initials printed neatly. Inside was a single check, made out to her name, enough to survive for a while, and a note. This isn't pity. It's closure. Use it wisely. There was no signature, but she knew the handwriting. Julian's. She stared at the paper for a long time before tearing it in half. Because it wasn't the money she wanted anymore. It was the respect she had thrown away. That night, Mara took out a notebook and began to write. Not for fame, not for redemption, just to remember. Page after page, she wrote about the girl who believed she could cheat her way into happiness. The woman who wore diamonds but felt worthless. The life that looked perfect but burned from the inside out. Her writing became her confession, her punishment, and maybe her only peace. By the time dawn broke, her eyes were red, but her heart felt quiet. For once, she didn't want to be anyone else. Not Julian's wife. Not the woman in magazines. Just Mara Brooks, finally stripped of pretense. She stood by the window again, watching light spill over cracked walls, and whispered, This is the life I earned, and maybe it's the one I deserve. There was no music, no redemption arc, just silence and understanding. Because in the end, Mara didn't lose to Julian. She lost to herself, and that was always the true price of greed.